For this first log, I've had to add a voiceover here because I wasn't fully committed to the idea of doing this on YouTube. The first bike I kind of had a project like this with was actually the Monster 900, and on that one I logged, as I've been saying, I logged the progress on that through Facebook posts and an album on Facebook. So I was still kind of thinking about doing it that way with this project. And instead, what I had was, what I ended up deciding to do is this YouTube channel. So, but because of that, I don't have any video from the first couple of nights. So I'll have to summarize with audio. I actually, let me rephrase that. I do have some video, but I didn't have like a complete, recording. I just was kind of messing around with the camera. And it was kind of over the course of that first day, or few days actually, that I decided that this would become a YouTube project as well. So the first couple of photos I have are just from the first night. Probably second night I owned the bike. I don't remember exactly. I don't care to look it up. But the first photo I put on here was just a photo of the Cagiva elephant that is sitting on the fuel tank. And what's kind of cool about this is it shows the age and the generation of the bike. If you're a Ducati fan, or if you're familiar with these bikes, you'll know that the first batch of 916s were actually built in the Varese factory. I think I'm pronouncing Varese correctly, which is a Cagiva factory. I believe mine was actually built in Bologna, based off of the VIN. But the elephants are still there, and that's pretty cool. It's really, really, really cool to have to find these elephants, and I was finding them all over. And so this was one of the first things I uploaded to social media. This is the clearest one, the one that's on the fuel tank. The second photo was a little bit of a surprise, though I guess it shouldn't have been. But what I did was I took the battery out of the Monster that was sitting, because as I'm recording this, it's been sold. But as this video should show chronologically, at this point, I still had owned the Monster that essentially I sold to get this bike. And anyway, I took the battery out, and just kind of to give you a sense of how the bike is, it was deader than a doornail when I found it, or at least it seemed like that. Normally when you buy a motorcycle, you hopefully will, if you're buying from a private party, at least every time I have, you take it for a test ride. You at least bare minimum hear the damn thing run, unless you're buying from a dealer, that's a little different. But yeah, for a used bike, you usually, unless it's a project like this, you hear the thing, you see it, you hear the engine run, you might rev it a few times. Hopefully, like I said, you take it for a test ride. And with this bike, it was just kind of like it was cold and dead, no running, no electronics switched on, nothing. And what was really cool here was turning on that, putting the battery on, turning the key, the whole thing fired up just fine. Or I should say fired up. The engine didn't start, but, these lights came on, the gauges came on. I heard the fuel pump prime, which was cool. I even tapped the starter just to see if it would spin. I didn't see a harm in it. And actually the starter did spin after just a moment's hesitation. And, so I took the battery out and then, put it back in the Monster, got ready to sell the Monster. And, so then the next morning I was actually able to tear into the bike. So I didn't, again, the footage is pretty incomplete because I wasn't documenting like I am now. So the initial part of me taking the tail and it's mostly inconsequential stuff, but figuring out how the tail and the tank come off, that's missing, of course. But now the tank and tail come off in like 10-15 seconds. They're really easy to remove. So I just have a quick clip of me pulling the airbox out, and I'm going to do a lot of these hyperlapse things. It's a format my phone can do. Just shoot it naturally. So like the phone is actually not recording video it's taking photos every couple of seconds and then splicing into a video, which I know that's how a video works, but it's not cutting out the middle part of the video. It's actually filming in the slow motion. It's kind of a cool effect, and you don't have to see every stinking moment. Like, you guys can figure out how to take an airbox out, but if just for those of you who are wondering about the bike, it's pretty easy. There's a couple of bolts that go around the perimeter of the airbox, and then inside the airbox itself, there's some latches, not specifically on the airbox, but they're where the air intakes. So in the front of the bike, there's these air intakes that sit right underneath the lights. There's some channels that flow into the airbox, and then some air filters that sit on the back of those channels, and then that goes into the airbox itself. One of the things that's really cool about these airboxes is the top of the airbox is actually the bottom of the fuel tank. So the quote-unquote airbox is actually just the bottom of the what did I say? So the top, the actual airbox itself is just the bottom half of the cavity that is considered the airbox. The top of it, is just a reassessment in the fuel tank, and that's of course a weight saving measure. But so it's a pretty cool thing. You can see how it all goes together there. So that whole component comes out. It was in these couple photos you'll see I had it dangling. There's a vacuum hose that goes to the edge of the airbox, and I just kind of had left it there. I wasn't sure how to take it out yet. I eventually pulled out. Then we have a couple of photos. One of the photos there, or actually, excuse me, two of these photos, you'll see that the fuel lines, and as advertised, this was one of the things that was very upfront, that the bike had this leak in the fuel lines, which is of course like 1/100th of the problems, I'm sure, of this bike. But this was one of the obvious things that the mechanic in whom's possession the bike was in. You can see the fuel lines have been taped, which the mechanic added, I don't know, one of those bits of tape, but it was apparently leaking from there. Not good stuff. All stuff that needs to get replaced. The other thing that you'll also see in these you can't see it. You can't see the damage, I don't think, but one of these quick disconnects, at the end there's these black and yellow tips, and those are actually fittings that you can quickly disconnect the fuel line from the tank. So it's pretty cool little function that the bike does. Let's see. So there was a gasket. There's a rubber grommet that goes on the edge of those quick disconnects, and that grommet was damaged and leaking. So one of the things, again, as advertises, you had to fix that O-ring, but I have opted to replace those with metal quick disconnects from a company. I think I got them from Gotham City Cycles. They're pretty common mod. I think a lot of anyone watching this who has owned a 916 will recognize this modification I did, where you put these metal ones on and they last a little bit longer. And you'll see here in a minute, actually, I don't know if I have the photo in here, but there was, when I went to remove these disconnects, one of them flat out snapped out. So I didn't even get it. I went to twist it out of the tank, and it just broke. So it was good that I replaced them, but it was a bit frustrating that the disconnect, the stud of the disconnect ended up stuck in the fuel tank, and so that was just a bit of a nuisance. I got a few pictures here of me working on the bike, which is something I don't usually have. Usually, because I am working on the bike, I don't ever have any pictures of, most of the time my family kind of gives me space. Sometimes the kids will come over and ask to help, and they get bored after a few minutes, but yeah, so it was kind of cool. My wife took some photos, and then anyway, long-winded. This is here the problem. You see this break point. In the middle of the photo, there is, you can see the broken plastic. This was such a headache. So these fuel lines go from the fuel tank, come out the bottom, out of the disconnects, and they're just, it's like 1.5 feet of fuel line, and it goes into the throttle body, which sits between the vertical and horizontal cylinder. In between there is where the throttle body is, and where these fuel lines connect, there are these they're just plastic L joint kind of things, and they're just fittings. So normally you would slide the bit onto these joints. Well, one of them I gave the slightest of tugs. I mean, we're not talking much pressure at all, and the damn thing snapped on me, which was a little bit frustrating. So this was the first, what the hell I had with the bike. I got a photo here of the good fitting, or at least the one that didn't snap on me, and that one was, the hose came off with minimal pressure, but the broken one ended up being a real nuisance. To remove those things, I had to, I got a close up here. This is off of another fitting that, it's the same fitting and same kind of hose, but it's a line that goes between the two cylinders, and it actually distributes the fuel. The fuel gets distributed through this line. It's weird. The fuel goes in to one cylinder and then distributed to the other. So the whole system kind of has to be pressurized. But anyway, this is the same kind of fitting and the same kind of spring pin. I've also heard cell lock pin. Anyway, that bit in the middle is how these things are retained. And so that was a little bit of an adventure trying to figure out how to knock those out. At this point, I was a little flustered. I kind of stepped back and I started picking through the rest of the bike. I didn't really want to deal with that broken fitting, because it was a bit of a hassle to replace. So I went through and I discovered that the toolkit was still inside the bike. I was a little surprised to that. And so I popped the toolkit open, I could tell there were tools inside, and lo and behold, there's a card in there. And the card reads, this bike was my soul. I am the original owner. A little smiley face there. And on the back side of the card, I'm not going to, I guess, dox this guy on one of my first YouTube videos. But, this guy was, he left his business card in there. Turns out I contacted the owner after I had cleared title paperwork, just because, I've mentioned in a previous video that the bike was a lien sale. This guy didn't really have any kind of claim to the bike, but I wasn't sure, just to be safe. But some few days after this was taken, I actually emailed this guy and we did some exchanges. And it turns out that he had, the bike had come back across his pathway, and that's when he added the card. So this isn't from his original ownership of the bike. The guy's a mechanic, which is good news for me. He only owned the bike for the first 2 years of its life, and then serviced it. He wasn't able to tell me much about its service history, except that it had been serviced, which is good. It's got about 20,000 miles, so it should have had, the belts should have been changed. The bike's nearly 25 years old, so the belts should have been changed like 12 times. But as far as actually running, mileage-wise, the belt should have gone through at least one major service, and the valves should have been checked 3 times. So knowing that this guy's looked at it, that gives me some hope that the valves have actually been checked. Of course, I don't have any records of that, but I do have an inkling that the valves have been checked. He is up in NorCal, Northern California, near San Jose-ish region. And that's where the previous owner from me was as well. So I think the bike spent most of its life in the San Jose, San Francisco-ish area, the Bay Area, kind of the broader Bay Area. Yeah, so we got a few other things here. I got just an added photo. There's a picture of the car seal, and I'll go over it just briefly. That's a seal my mom just randomly got me, and it's a little mascot. I put it in my car to kind of entertain my kids, and so we call it the car seal, and it's just kind of an ongoing joke. My wife will steal the seal and put it in her car, even though when it's in my car, it's there so that the kids don't fight, because I don't have any kind of like DVD system or anything. But anyway, it goes back and forth, so I'm sure it'll pop up in some of the videos. There it is, sitting on the Monster with the for sale sign. So a few days went by. I had, busy life, but I went to one of my favorite places, Harbor Freight. I bought some pins, some what do you call it? Some punches, rather. Good grief. Not that hard. So I found these punches, and I used that's how you remove the cell lock pin to get these fittings out. Popped them out, and I got a not brand new. I got a used throttle body from Gotham Cycles, because the old ones the part was not available. There was no way to just buy those fittings, at least not that I could easily find. I'm sure there's some way to get them. They're just little plastic fittings, but I got some used ones from a used throttle body. It was $50, not bad for the entire throttle body. It came with the whole thing minus the injectors. But yeah, so I removed those using the punches, and had to take a little bit off the throttle body to get easy access, but and I replaced it from there. And then, so that'll pretty much wrap up the voice recording. I'm going to switch over. I have some video I did shoot, and then I'll be able to summarize it there from the video. Well, so I got time to work on it tonight, and didn't make the greatest of discovery. Still dealing with the stupid quick release thing, and quick release connect, and I decided to pull the fuel pump, just because I could already see there's shit going into the fuel tank, and well, made some discoveries. Alright, so what we found, let me grab the light. A couple things. First of all, the plastic's still in that damn fitting, and I'm just gonna have to work it out. That's not too disastrous, but just more to-do list mostly. It's, again, nothing disastrous, but this hose absolutely needs to be replaced. And just looking at the way it's put together, this fuel pump assembly has clearly been out. 100%, no doubt. Just there was an actual gasket here. This was like some kind of this looks like some make your own gasket stuff. So I'm not sure what that is. And so it looks like somebody changed out this line and used some non-fuel resistant stuff, because this thing is just dissolving. In fact, there's some holes in it there. I can see kind of there. So that's not great. But you might notice that orange color, which is not good. So again, not a disaster, to be expected with a used bike. But getting my little light in there, yeah, and that's a problem. And so that's actually, I think most of it's actually from me taking the fuel tank or taking this fuel pump out. But you can just tell there's guck in there. That's why I stopped, or at least didn't try to do it with all this assembled still. But yeah, it's not terrible. It just kind of runs around like the outside edge of it mostly. The bottom edge is pretty clean. I'll get in there with a mirror and take a look at the other bits. So what does that mean? Well, means I'll have to just take care of it. I'll take it to a shop and get it cleaned out, and we'll move on from there. So.